This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Welcome back as we continue to spotlight ChangeMaker Tim Shriver, the longtime chairman of Special Olympics. Tim, in part one, we discussed how Special Olympics has become an authority in integration and inclusion. And now I'd love to hear about Unite.us, your newly launched initiative.
Well, Unite.us or Unite is just an effort to take the lessons of the Special Olympics movement we've noticed in young people, kids who are inclusive. We looked at them for years. What do they have that's distinctive? What are their qualities? Could we teach that? Could we teach inclusivity? We discovered that you actually can. Inclusivity actually has certain skills. People who are inclusive have high degrees of empathy. We can teach empathy. People who are inclusive have high degrees of moral courage. They're willing to stand up for people who are being bullied. We can teach moral courage. People who are inclusive have a very fundamental belief, and that is that everyone is equal. We can teach that. Our country teaches that, right? So with Unite.us, we said, well, if these are good qualities to teach kids, why don't we have these qualities in the country? Why don't we teach dignity through our media and through our politics? And people laughed, they kind of laugh at me. Are you kidding? Dignity in politics? That's a dogfight. That's a horrible place. Dignity on cable news? All they show is contempt. One side hates the other just as much as the other side hates back. We have a culture of contempt, as one colleague said. And my view is, look, I learned this from Special Olympics athletes. The world may be telling you, no, you can't do it. You're not able, you don't have enough strength or power or money to change the culture. But Unite.us is already 300-400 of the world's most profound spiritual, political, cultural, musical, celebrity leaders on the record saying, it's time we learn to unite, to be inclusive. We cannot continue to meet contempt with contempt, to meet hatred with hatred. So we're trying to build media, podcasts, shows, stream-a-thons, maybe someday documentaries, and challenges to our political system to end contempt and hatred and replace it with the same values that Loretta Claiborne has taught me my whole life. Treat everybody equal, have the moral courage to stand up to bullies, show empathy, gain perspective from understanding and listening to others. That's what we're trying to do. It sounds maybe crazy, but we're trying.
So, I think, when I'm listening to this, I actually hear topics for people to incorporate, but it's on the individual level, but there's also this larger concept, employees, employers, organizations, it's structures, it's processes, it's just keeps expanding the more you were describing this. Any specific advice on how leaders can support inclusion and, specifically disability inclusion?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, the big frontiers for people with intellectual and developmental challenges is first to change our language. Let's get out of the language of defect, of weakness, of problem, of contempt. Let's replace it with the language of neurodiversity, my favorite word is diff-ability, different abilities. The diversity and equity and inclusion movements that are strengthening now every day in our country, in businesses and in communities, are fantastic. They should include people with intellectual and developmental disability. This is a group that has so often left out of those conversations. I talk all the time to people in HR departments at big companies. They say, well, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. I said, do they include people with developmental challenges? Well, no, but they include women. They include people from LGBTQ groups. They include people who've suffered from racism and racial oppression. But I said, well, that's good. That's great. Fantastic. Essential. But could you add people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? 200,000 of them were locked up in prison 50 years ago. Okay? So we haven't solved this problem. So hiring and welcoming. Faith-based institutions can do more to welcome people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Schools can do more to promote social inclusion. People with disabilities can often be the teachers in school, not just the victims or the learners or the needy population, the teachers of ending bullying in schools. So there's a lot of ways in which we can get our political and our social and these are not partisan, by the way. Some people say, well, how are you going to do that when Republicans and Democrats don't get along? It's because I could care less about Republicans and Democrats when it comes to dignity.
Right.
There's no separation on dignity. There's no separation on empathy. We can agree on these things. We don't have to live in a world of contempt for one another. We can hold each other accountable, but not in contempt. That's just not necessary. So I think this is a field that can also help create some common ground for our country at a time when we're really starving for it. And I would almost say the survival of our nation depends on whether we can solve some of these intractable problems together, not shrink from them, but also not descend into a vision that the only way to solve a big problem is to crush the other side. That just doesn't work.
Right. And part of us we want to be hopeful to say that it is time now for, the country and for people to actually recognize that this is going to be our country's strength if we can come to the table and really believe in inclusion more than a concept or more than something that's on
Right.
paper, but that we can practically incorporate this. People with disabilities make up the largest minority group in America, and so often they're the least accounted for when it comes
Yeah.
to equal rights and
Yeah.
anti-discrimination.
Yeah. Still invisible too much too often.
You mentioned employment even, and I pulled some information and I was just shocked. It says that people with disabilities have an unemployment rate of 6 to 9%. And the unemployment rate for people without disabilities is around 3.6%. And so we're talking about a jobless rate for people with disabilities that's like nearly 2 or 3 times as high as their rate for those without a disability.
Yeah.
And in
Well,
real
those numbers are actually, I hate to say it, but those are actually good numbers. I've seen, for instance, in the intellectual disability field, sometimes people will say the unemployment rate is up to 70 or 80% in terms of competitive employment. So, we're just scratching the surface of the gifts and contributions that these people can make in the workforce, and the urgency of demanding that they get given the chance to do jobs where they can perform very well and make a huge difference. Everybody is better off when people aren't excluded. It's just the way, no matter how much we think the opposite, it's just always true. We all are happier when each one is happier. So the more we can create and expand the circle of belonging, the better we are.
I love what you said there, the circle of belonging, and that it meets at such a core. I really believe in, why we are here and also why we're so different too. And specifically Special Olympics and, inclusion programs, they actually pull back the curtain on perception and they really shine a light on an individual's abilities. And this has so much messaging that can translate into, workforce, education, community contribution. It's almost kind of like we have this amazing potential here that only a few people have discovered.
Right, exactly.
Only a few employees,
but think
right?
about it. You're right, but think about it. Everyone's wrong. Turn on your TV tonight. Most Americans are looking, well, who can I find to make sense of the world? Who can I find that's going to get us out of this mess? I don't care which side you're on political things. Who's going to show us what we got, what we can do here to heal all these problems? And sometimes it's right in our house, right in our school. A
So,
lot of times our athletes are the best teachers of the way forward. And, It doesn't come in a rule book, but it comes from a heart of gold. And that's what I think
Right.
a lot of us need.
Right. And, we all know, I mean, whether it is, the Dalai Lama or, whatever,
Hmm.
whomever you're, listening to, there are pieces that are universal that say if you give of yourself, and what you get back in return and
Yes.
the learning and everything. So there is this universal principle that I don't think that we have, we just haven't discovered this yet as a nation, really.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's people talk, in all these different great spiritual traditions about giving is receiving. I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you how many millions of times I've heard that from Special Olympics volunteers. I went
Yep.
to serve, but I got back more than I gave. And I
Yep.
ask people over and over again, what did you get back? And they tell me the most beautiful stories of discovering the best in themselves, of seeing for the first time the possibilities of human generosity, of rediscovering what made them go into become a doctor or a teacher, the love and compassion they have for others, having it re-inspired in them. People go to those games and they go to line the field or to serve water or to be an announcer or to help with parking or to any number of thousands of jobs, take pictures, write stories, clean up, empty garbage cans. They go to help. But what they get back, oh my goodness, giving is receiving, and you get back your best self.
So tell us more about your New York Times bestseller. The title was Fully Alive: Discovering What Matters Most. Is that what we're talking about here? Is that what your book
Well,
covers?
the book was my attempt to tell the story of how the Special Olympics movement is, in effect, a classroom of the heart. So, a lot of people who loved it and responded to it positively, to whom I'm very grateful, saw it as a book about disability. And it was. It was a history of the person with an intellectual disability in my own family, my Aunt Rosemary. It was the story of my mother, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who founded the Special Olympics movement, my uncle, President Kennedy, who helped launch public policy changes in the field of intellectual and developmental disability. But it was really my attempt to tell the story of how these athletes, Loretta, and Daniel Thompson, and all these other athletes, how they've changed me. So you know, it's really, I hope for people, uh, a way of seeing the world differently. If you're looking to find a way to see the world with less fear and less anxiety, I think the book helps. It will tell you stories that will refresh your spirit and I hope lead you to believe once again in the goodness of the human spirit. That's what it's about. It's a story of the goodness of the human spirit and how it comes in places you can't possibly anticipate in ways that will change your life. And that's what Special Olympics has been for me. It's changed my life. I think made me a more peaceful, a more decent, and certainly in some ways, most ultimately, a more free person. I hope freer to be who I am, right? That's the gift that, in my view, God has given to each of us the gift to be uniquely who you are. And this movement is all about unleashing that gift for each of us. And certainly it's been that way for me.
Well, just listening to you talk right now, I want to go out and, read the
Mm.
book, and I want to volunteer, and I want to tell everybody to volunteer.
Thank you.
And, but there's also more than that, too. So what would you tell people who believe in inclusion conceptually, but they just don't know where to start practically?
It's a great question. Obviously it depends a little bit on where you are in life. If you're working in a school system, there's ways to promote social inclusion there. If you're working in the medical field, there are ways to promote justice there. But I think the first step is what I'd call the respect step. Respect is a word that we use a lot, but it really means to look twice, to relook, to look a second time. And I just invite people, when you see someone who you're scared of, maybe someone who doesn't come from the same background as you, someone you've been led to believe has different values than yours, someone who you think is a threat to you. Try the respect strategy. Just look a second time. Take that pause, that moment in which you suspend your first reaction, all those labels that come pouring into your head, let them go just for a moment and try to look again. And when you do that, and when I've learned to do that from my teachers, the athletes of Special Olympics, who have done that to me, who have looked a second time at me and seen something in me that sometimes I had no idea could have possibly have been there, we start to see each other just a little bit more deeply, So each of us, if we're in a corner suite of an organization, we can help with hiring. If we're the principal of a school, we can help with promoting social inclusion. If we're the doctor in the medical facility, we can make sure that we treat people with intellectual disabilities and don't turn them away. Whatever little things we can do, but whoever you are and wherever you are, you can take that second look when you see a person with Down syndrome or autism or other forms of difference that animate and create the human diversity and the human beauty of our family. Look twice. Pause just long enough to look from the inside out. And I think almost invariably you'll see something that will refresh your soul, because it'll be beautiful.
Well, Dr. Shriver, I am so thrilled to have had you on this podcast. And, we've been going over ChangeMakers is our tagline, if you will, for this podcast. And we've really been focusing on affordable housing. And when we wanted to have you on this, we kind of said, this is such a swerve in the affordable housing space. But then we just all realized that your messaging here and your passion and your words of wisdom, they apply to so many different avenues, not just affordable housing. And so we really wanted to have you specifically on here. And, your work as a disability rights activist is so crucial right now. Really maybe even more so than ever before as we, emerge here as a country. And I appreciate the time and everything you are doing on a daily basis. I'm glad that your passion has led you to this point.
Thank you. And I think that, this is where people, all of us, whether we count ourselves as Americans or from another country, some people will pick the path of affordable housing, others education, others healthcare, others transportation, others food, nutrition. The ways in which we can give back to the world are in the billions. Everybody wants, at some level, to join in that work. And I think the only thing we need to know and remember is that all of us have the same ultimate goal. To protect and to preserve and to honor the dignity of every human being equally. And, if someone doesn't have a roof over their head, those words are shallow unless we put a roof over. And if someone can't go to a school, it's not enough to say, I believe in dignity. I believe in universal value. I believe in the sacredness of every human life. It's not enough to say it. You got to do it. We got to love it. As Mother Teresa said, love is action. So I'm thrilled, honored that we're included in the action agenda of affordable housing, because I don't think there's any separation between us when it comes to what matters most.
So well said. We agree wholeheartedly. Thank you to you and your team, and you guys keep pressing on. And many of us are in this space as well. And so, we're all in this together.
Thank you. And hopefully we'll be back on the playing fields very, very soon, able to celebrate and refresh our commitment to a more just and a more peaceful future.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.